Well, welcome back to Sunday Evening Devotions. Well, we left Moses up on the mountain. God had called him back up to the mountain to receive the laws. He had gone up there with the elders, and they had feasted with God. And God had spoke from the mountain and given the Ten Commandments and the various case laws that followed. And so what God now had in mind was the giving of the plans for the worship of God's people, particularly the tabernacle. It's kind of like if you're going to build something, you need a set of plans. And you get the plans, and they're all drawn up and give you everything, and then you put the plans into action, you execute the plan. Well, that's what God did for Moses. You see, God had always desired to restore the relationship with his people after it was lost in the Garden of Eden when Adam sinned. And so what God then proposes is that Moses was to build an earthly structure, a tabernacle, which would become the template for the temple, and it would be a picture of God dwelling with his people. It would be a picture of God's throne room, and a way to communicate that God was with his people. But of course, sin was still present, and so there was a plan to deal with that as well. And so as we think of these plans that God gave to Moses, as God gives them in detail, the tabernacle was to be constructed from various types of fabric and then covered with animal skins, and it was supposed to be transportable and all weather ready, so to speak. And so in the innermost part would be the Holy of Holies, and it would be a cube, a room that was exact square. And inside that room would be the Ark of Testimony, or the Ark of the Covenant, as we've come to call it. And it was to be a chest, and in the chest would be the Ten Commandments that God had written on the stones, and the tablets of stone, actually. And there would be a mercy seat over that chest, which the priest would come in just once a year and sprinkle the blood from the altar of burnt offering. And so that would be God's throne room. And of course, the overriding theme there was that of grace, that is God's holiness, but God's grace to his people. Well, the next room outside of that would be the holy place. It was more of a rectangular room. Again, all this was done in fabric and with gold plating and finely woven material and various designs. And in that room was the table of showbread. There was to be a table with 12 loaves of baked bread, one for each tribe, again speaking of God's provision for his people, his supply for their needs. There would be on the other side of the room the candelabra, or the light, the lampstand, all in gold. And then on the far end of the room, towards the curtain which divided it from the holy place, or the Holy of Holies, there was the altar of incense. And so this room was where the priests would do their daily ministrations. They would change the bread, light the candelabra, the menorah, and they would offer the incense on the altar of incense as the prayers of the saints. And so then outward from that was the courtyard. And in the courtyard was also some furnishings that Moses was to build. There was to be the altar of burnt offering, where the various offerings would be made, the thank offerings, the sin offerings, the guilt offerings. Some of those things were wholly consumed on the altar. Some were partially consumed, just the fat portions, and there were the leftovers to be eaten by the priests, and yet others were to be eaten by the people themselves. And so this was a place where the people of God could be and to experience the presence of God and even eat in his presence. But of course there was these barriers, and only the priest could go in certain places, and only the priest in the Holy of Holies once a year, because sin was still present. The altars and all these things were means by which God was pointing to the sacrifice that Christ would supply. It would be not the animal and not the blood of animals, but it would be his own blood that would take away the sins of the people. But for now, this was a symbol of all that God was promising to do to be with his people. And Moses was promised that God would send his angel to go with them. And so all these things were prepared for Moses. The plans were given. But of course, before they could be enacted, we're going to find out in our next story that sin happens. As it always does in this world, sin interrupts. Sin is a problem. But none of this surprises God, because God knows not only that we're sinners, but he has a plan to redeem us, and that includes his great mercy. All these things pointed to Christ, who would finally come and accomplish all this on our behalf. Well, that's good news. Good night.